We are talking about the movie Prey. This one is directed and co-written by Frank Calhoun. Now, Frank Calhoun, you may know, I think, primarily as the director of the Elijah Wood starring Maniac remake. Although he has done a couple of other horror films as well. P2, I think, was one. I Lived was another. And here he is with another movie. And this one actually has its star as Logan Miller, who plays Toby. You've also got Christy Forsyth. Now, this is a kind of a tropical horror film, I guess you want to say. It starts off with, we see Toby as this kind of millennial stereotype, this kind of like guy who just wants to sit around looking on his phone all day. And one day he kind of just refuses to kind of help his dad work on this car. And because of this, his dad is kind of left exposed to two masked robbers who want to steal the car and ultimately kill him in the process. Now, Toby feels obviously massive guilt because of this, and he ends up going on this kind of self-reflection kind of like holiday or something, and it's kind of not really explained if he was forced to go on this or whether he has chosen to go on it. But essentially, he goes out to the kind of, I think it's the Philippines. And they have a kind of a bunch of unoccupied islands that are there, and he's essentially left there on his own on a particular kind of island for 3 days to try and have a little bit of self-reflection, kind of have a little bit of whatever he wants to do, kind of get himself together. And there's a few other kind of like kids who are doing the same thing. Apparently there's 100 or so unoccupied islands around the Philippines, according to this film. So he's there, and he appears, maybe he isn't as alone as he thought, as there appears to be this beautiful young girl also on this island. Now, Toby is pretty useless. He is as good as a chocolate teapot. Very much just clumsy, always kind of like hurting himself and seems to get in trouble. But this girl is like Lara Croft. She is like the survival expert here. So the two of them meet up, and you may think there's going to be some kind of romance going involved here, but there may well be a demonic force lurking in the undergrowth of this lush wilderness here. So what will happen? You have to watch the movie to find out. So let's discuss Prey. I feel this movie is a little bit of a mixed bag. First of all, we'll start off with what I liked. There are some elements here that I felt are so strong in regards to their direction and writing. Even right down to the opening credits, I feel are incredibly effective and actually kind of tell a narrative, a little bit of backstory about what you might expect in regards to some people who may have been on this island before. And it's done in kind of a subtle way where you can kind of get the gist about maybe what's going on and give you a little preview about maybe what happens later without kind of spelling it out for you. I thought it was very well done. And then we get kind of like our early scenes where sort of Toby is feeling guilt over the death of his father. And again, I think it's a very kind of subtle piece of filmmaking, because he's not directly responsible ultimately for his father's death. And it's never kind of said, he never kind of says, I'm feeling really guilty and, all of that. It's not hit over your head. But there's some subtle acting, some subtle kind of camera work and kind of like edits that I feel you just expresses what, his feeling of, he was so wrapped up in his own shit, he kind of let his dad get killed, and you just see the burden on him. And I thought it's a really strong kind of opening kind of sequence, I've got to say. And even the actual murder scene itself, this is right at the beginning of the movie, so it's not a spoiler really, was very well done. And obviously we have these kind of location shootings here on this kind of like, this kind of tropical kind of setting, so it's very different from kind of a lot of the kind of horror films. Obviously there's been jungle-based horror movies before, but nonetheless it's it makes for a nice change of kind of pace here. And I've got to say, it looks really cool where they are. It looks like they clearly had a great time making this movie. But I actually quite liked the character of Toby, because he is such a kind of like a useless. If from the UK, you may know the characters Kevin and Perry, popularised by Harry Enfield, and they're kind of these like useless kind of like millennials. I mean, this was before really millennials, but in today's kind of generation, it's Generation Z or whatever. But you get what I mean. It's a self-absorbed kind of teenager who just kind of thinks about himself and has no life skills. And that is what we are presented with, and but you still kind of empathise with them. So I think they do a pretty good job in kind of setting this up, and it has a bit of intrigue about what's going on when he meets Madeline, who is this beautiful young girl who seems to have all the kind of survival skills. She's got her Lara Croft going on. And, you know, there's a little bit of maybe romance going on. She's kind of like being a little bit cagey about where she's come from and who she was with and things like that. Think what's going on. And then we have this kind of, sort of dark presence within this kind of like the trees and the undergrowth here. And what, again, we don't really know. And the movie, for the most part, it's not telling you what's going on, but you get enough that you are hooked with the kind of the story. And then towards the end, obviously, things are revealed, and kind of we see a lot more of the kind of the supernatural presence that is actually lurking, and find out what's going on, etc. And there are some kind of quite fun elements in regards to the way the kind of the creature is kind of depicted. I actually thought it was quite good design. It's a little bit too CGI in places, but I can kind of forgive that to a certain degree. But I felt the design was intriguing, and you know, and kind of it goes in a direction what I thought was quite good in that kind of that last act with the kind of the confrontations and all of this. I'm trying not to give anything away, obviously. But what doesn't work for me, I've got to say there is some massive logic issues with this movie. Particularly, I mean, I like some of the writing here, but just the very idea that there is a company that lets kind of like troubled teenagers on their own on an island, which has clearly got kind of like dangerous wildlife and stuff, you know, unsupervised for 3 days. And then kind of goes back. This company would just like go out of business within seconds. I mean, people would clearly kind of get themselves hurt. So that whole setup to me just seems completely kind of ridiculous. And there's one member of staff in this kind of cruise looking after, by the looks of it, around 10 different people who are all on different islands. It just seems like such a kind of like a wishy-washy setup, to be honest. And I've got to say, there are a lot of conveniences here. Obviously, it just so happens that our main character, Toby, you know, he finds this attractive, age-appropriate girl. What are the chances? Just happens to be on this kind of island. You know, there are various kind of other kind of like plot points and little bits of callbacks that you'll kind of say, I'll remember that. It looks almost like a video game. Remember this kind of like canister, because this is going to be helpful later on in something that's going to happen to use it. Things like this, lots of kind of setup, etc. So it kind of goes somewhat formulaic to a certain degree. Like I've said, I think maybe the CGI a little bit will put people off as well. I didn't mind it, to be honest, because I appreciate these films are relatively low budget. It's kind of a mix between practical and kind of CGI effects, but it clearly does look like CGI, to be honest. There's also some characters here that are just set up for cannon fodder, so you don't really necessarily care about what's kind of going on here. And you know, some people may not kind of like the Toby character, because obviously he is set up to be such a useless kind of character. But maybe the thing that annoyed me the most with this movie is that literally halfway through, Toby seems to pick up all these kind of survival instincts and kind of like skills from nowhere. In actual fact, the movie even references it, but then another character says, "Oh, how come you've become all Rambo in 6 days?" But that's exactly what I was thinking. I was literally thinking he's turned into Rambo overnight without any really kind of experience, just watching this one girl do it for a day, and he's kind of, you know, from being someone who literally can't walk 10 metres without hurting himself to being able to kind of like build traps, weapons, can fish, spearfish, all of these things. It just is a little bit silly at times. So this movie, because of that, kind of falls definitely into the kind of the schlocky B-movie kind of style of horror film, rather than one you can really kind of take seriously. And I've got to say, I thought the ending was, again, it's just one of those typical horror movie endings. You know exactly what I'm talking about. And I just wish that kind of trope where there's just this little tag and it's like, oh my God, something really unexpected, hashtag not expected, you know, completely expected has happened. I mean, I wish films just wouldn't do that. There are a few tropes that I don't like, and that is now one of them, because it's just been done to death. Anyway, but overall, I've got to say, I still found this movie, for the most part, intriguing. I think partly because there's such a good setup at the beginning of the film, despite these ropey excuse to get him on the island. And the kind of the way the movie kind of dangles a few plot threads without kind of explaining it until the kind of the latter half keeps you engaged, kind of watching, wanting to find out what the actual story is here. And when it's all said and done, I think it's quite an interesting explanation. But this movie it has some silly kind of logic issues and just ends up kind of going into some kind of like tropey territory. But I still think it's worth a look. I'll give this one a 6 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.